Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Before we start, please leave a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is when you listen to this narration. We want to know where these written accounts go and when they go there, day or night. The stillness of dawn in the Ozark Mountains holds secrets that the mist won't tell. In 1869, in the remote hollows of Shannon County, Missouri, there was a strange house called the Whitfield Manor. The 7 identical windows that lined the eastern side of this building made it stand out, not its architecture, which would later be the subject of much speculation. Each one was perfectly spaced, the same shape and size, and supposedly made for one of Jeremiah Whitfield's 7 adult daughters. The Whitfield case is still one of the most disturbing things that has ever happened in Missouri's history, not because of what was found, but because of what was never found. According to county records, Jeremiah Whitfield, a rich merchant from St. Louis, came to the area in 1862 and bought almost 300 acres of isolated woods along what is now Route 19, about 12 miles south of Eminence. The Shannon County Register from the 18th of April, 1862, says that Whitfield came with 7 women, all of whom were introduced as his daughters. The names of the Whitfields were Elizabeth, Catherine, Margaret, Josephine, Rebecca, Virginia, and Sophia. As noted in his personal journal, which was found decades later, the county clerk was struck by the fact that all 7 women looked to be about the same age, between 25 and 35 years old. None of them were married, which was unusual for women of that time, and they all wore the same high-necked gray dresses. When asked about his wife, Whitfield is said to have said that she had returned to the earth, which some people took to mean that he was a widow. People in the area thought the land Whitfield bought was mostly useless because it had rocky ground that wasn't good for farming, thick woods, and a small creek that flooded in the spring. Whitfield, on the other hand, paid a lot of money and started building what would later be known as the 7-windowed house right away. Amos Breedlove, who lived about 2 miles away and was the closest neighbor, wrote a letter to his brother in 1863 about the building. He wrote, "The structure's oddness cannot be overstated. The eastern wall has 7 identical windows that are evenly spaced, as if to let the morning sun into 7 identical rooms. Whitfield is in charge of every part of the construction, and he gets angry when workers don't follow his exact instructions. The daughters are rarely seen, and when they do appear, they move in complete silence." Local craftsmen who were hired to build the house later said that the windows had strange requirements. Each one had to be exactly 42 inches wide and 63 inches tall. It cost a lot of money to bring in the glass panes from a specific Boston-based company. Whitfield's insistence that each window be put in at a slightly different angle was the strangest thing. The differences were so small that they were hard to see with the naked eye. He did, however, use specialized tools to measure each one over and over again, making tiny changes until he was happy. By the end of 1863, the house was finished. It was a big 2-story building made of local stone and wood, sitting on a small rise that looked out over the creek. As mentioned, the eastern wall with its 7 windows was the most interesting part. People in the area said that there was a separate bedroom behind each window, one for each daughter, but no one from the area was ever invited inside to see if this was true. The Whitfield family lived in almost complete isolation for the next 6 years. The only time they saw the nearest town, Eminence, was once a month when Jeremiah would come by wagon to buy things. Shopkeepers said that his list always had 7 of each item, like 7 pairs of gloves, 7 bars of soap, and 7 spools of thread. People thought that Whitfield's family belonged to a strange religious group because he would only say that his daughters were engaged in their devotions when asked about them. Thomas Ledbetter owned the general store in Eminence from 1860 to 1875. He kept detailed records of all transactions, which was common for merchants at the time who often gave customers credit. Whitfield's ledgers, which are kept by the Shannon County Historical Society, show that his purchases became stranger and stranger over time. At first, they were just everyday things, like food, cloth, and basic tools. By 1865, the lists had things like specialized astronomical instruments, a lot of candles, rare herbs like belladonna and wolfsbane, and books that had been sent from Europe with titles written in Latin. Ledbetter's personal notes, which he wrote in the margins of his ledgers, show that he is becoming more worried. Mr. Whitfield's manner grows more agitated with each visit. His hands tremble when conducting business. He speaks of astronomical conjunctions and stellar alignments, claiming the position of the Pleiades holds special significance. When asked directly about the welfare of his daughters, he becomes evasive, stating only that their education progresses according to the celestial schedule. What makes this case so scary is that no one ever saw all 7 daughters at the same time during those 6 years. Most people in the area, in fact, would say they only saw 2 at a time, always keeping their distance and not talking to anyone. In his records from 1865, County Doctor Dr. Ellsworth Jensen said he was called to the property to treat Miss Whitfield for a high fever. When he got there, he wasn't allowed inside the main house. Instead, he was shown to a small building where one of the daughters was sick. Jensen wrote in his medical journal, "The patient refused to speak, communicating only through nods. Most disturbing was the discovery of unusual ligature marks around her wrists, as if she had been recently bound." When asked about these marks, the father said they were the result of devotional practices. Jensen tried to talk to the woman in private, but Whitfield wouldn't let them be alone. Whitfield got angry when the doctor said she might get better faster in town where he could keep an eye on her condition. She said she had to stay near her window to get better. Jensen gave what treatment he could and then left, feeling bad about the situation. Jensen told a doctor friend in Street, Louis, in a letter that he had suspicions. The letter was found in 1962. "I fear something bad is happening at the Whitfield property." The young woman looked sick and sad, and her eyes had the same vacant look I have seen in patients at the state asylum. What worried me most was how she reacted when her father mentioned the upcoming alignment. Her whole body shook. 3 months after this visit, Jensen went missing while supposedly traveling to another county to give advice on a case. Along the road, they found his horse and medical bag, but they never found the doctor. Even though there was never a direct link to the Whitfield family, people in the area naturally became suspicious of the strange household. In October 1866, a group of surveyors from the county assessor's office came to the Whitfield property to update the land records. There was a short but troubling note in their official report. "On our way to the property, we saw 7 women standing in a perfect circle in a clearing near the house. They were all wearing the same gray dresses and had their arms outstretched toward the center of the circle, where Mr. Whitfield seemed to be taking measurements with a sextant. When they saw us coming, the group quickly broke up, with the women going back to the house and Whitfield coming to meet us. He was adamant that we not go any further onto his property, saying that a celestial alignment in progress could not be disturbed. When asked what this alignment was, he talked about the 7 Sisters constellation and a terrestrial mirror he was making in a way that didn't make sense. Because he was upset and they didn't like the situation, they finished their assessment from the property line. The things Jeremiah bought in 1867 were even more interesting. Later investigations found hardware store receipts that showed orders for strange amounts of chains, locks, and something that was only called restraints. When the store owner asked Whitfield about these purchases, he said they were necessary for keeping the wilderness at bay. Many people would later guess that the wilderness wasn't the forests around the property. During this time, Silas Humphrey, the blacksmith who did a lot of custom metalwork for Whitfield, gave a deposition in 1870 as part of the investigation after Whitfield's death. Humphrey says that Whitfield ordered 7 identical sets of iron brackets, each of which was meant to be attached to a stone wall and had a lock on it. Whitfield said that the purpose of the instruments was to mount astronomical instruments that needed to be exactly positioned and secured. Humphrey said that the design didn't seem right for the job, but he did it anyway, as asked. Whitfield's behavior got weirder and weirder during his rare visits to town in 1868. Several accounts say he was mumbling to himself about approaching alignment and the sisters reaching perfect harmony. The local minister, Reverend Isaiah Pembroke, wrote about a strange encounter in his personal journal. "Encountered Mr. Whitfield after services today. Though he did not attend worship, he waited outside the church, seemingly eager to discuss theological matters. When I suggested such notions bordered on paganism, he became agitated, declaring that science and divinity are merely different languages describing the same cosmic order. Most concerning was his statement that his daughters were being prepared as vessels for celestial essence, and that each had a designated window through which the transformation would occur. Pembroke encouraged him to bring his family to Sunday services, but he laughed unnervingly, saying they were already engaged in more significant worship. By the beginning of 1869, people in the area had started to notice something even more disturbing. His speech was very disturbing. He talked about old religions based on stars and asked if I thought the heavens could give people eternal life if they were properly aligned with earthly vessels. The number of women who went with Jeremiah on his rare trips to town had gone down. He used to bring 2 daughters, but now he came by himself. In February 1869, the postmaster asked Whitfield about his family directly. He is said to have said, "My daughters stay at home where they belong. Each has her own window, and each must stay true to her purpose." In the spring and summer of 1869, Whitfield bought a lot of things that, looking back, seemed like he was getting ready for something big. In May, he bought a lot of white candles, certain herbs that are known for their use in ceremonies, and 7 identical white dresses from a seamstress in the nearby town of West Plains. He even gave her very exact measurements for each dress. He ordered a special telescope from a scientific supply company in Chicago in July. He paid extra for faster shipping. In August 1869, he went to a jeweler in Springfield and ordered 7 identical silver medallions. The jeweler later said that each one had an unusual astronomical chart centered on the Pleiades constellation. A letter found among Whitfield's things after he died, never sent but addressed to an unnamed colleague at Harvard University, gives a disturbing look at how his mental health was getting worse. "The alignment is coming. My calculations show that the conjunction will be perfect on September 13th. The terrestrial 7 and the celestial 7 will align perfectly at dawn. The vessels are ready, but some needed more rigorous conditioning than others. I expected some resistance and have overcome it. The windows are positioned with mathematical precision, each refracting the light at the exact angle needed to activate the corresponding stellar energy. When the transformation happens, I will achieve what no astronomer has ever done, the perfect marriage of heavenly bodies with earthly vessels, immortality through stellar communion." A bad storm hit the Ozarks on the night of the 12th of September 1869. Lightning hit a number of buildings in Shannon County, including the Whitfield house, which was far away. Amos Breedlove saw the flames from his property and rode through the rain to help. What he found would be the basis for one of Missouri's most disturbing historical accounts. Breedlove's sworn statement to the Shannon County Sheriff, recorded on the 14th of September 1869, said, "When I got to the Whitfield property, I saw flames consuming the eastern part of the house. The 7 windows were clearly visible, illuminated by the fire behind them. I called out, but no one answered. When I went in through the unlocked front door, I found the main part of the house to be eerily empty. There was no furniture or personal belongings, as if no one had been living there. The eastern part, on the other hand, had 7 identical rooms, each with a window facing the sunrise and only accessible from the main hallway through a heavy door. There was only 1 wooden chair in front of the window in 6 of the rooms. The 7th room had Jeremiah Whitfield's body in a chair facing the window, with his back to the door. It looked like the deep cut across the throat was what killed him." Breedlove's testimony goes on to include information that was left out of official reports at first, but was later found in his personal journal. The official record doesn't show what Whitfield's body looked like after the fatal wound. His eyes were open, and instead of fear, they were fixed in an expression of rapturous expectation. The 7 different symbols carved into his forehead were even more disturbing. They were rough drawings of stars, and what I knew to be the pattern of the Pleiades. The most disturbing thing was finding out that the doors to all 7 rooms could only be locked from the outside and not opened from the inside. But all of them were open, and the locks didn't seem to have been touched. What wasn't found was the most disturbing of all. There was no sign of any of the 7 daughters. There were no bodies found after the fire, no proof that they had left, and no sign of where they might have gone. It was as if they had just disappeared, with only the 7 windows left behind as proof that they had ever been there. The investigation that followed raised more questions than it answered. There were no birth certificates for any of the Whitfield daughters in the county's records. There was no proof that Jeremiah had a family in Street Lewis, where he was said to have lived before. After his death, a close look at the property deed showed that the owner was not Jeremiah Whitfield, but the Seven Sisters Trust, a legal entity that could not be linked to any known group. A closer look at the property showed more disturbing details. Investigators found what looked like an astronomical laboratory in a small outbuilding that had not been burned. The room had advanced telescopes, star charts, and 7 identical silver pendulums, each hanging over a round stone with different minerals in it. A leather-bound journal found in this outbuilding had thousands of calculations that tracked the movements of the Pleiades constellation with obsessive accuracy. The last entry, from the 12th of September 1869, had only one sentence: "Dawn brings transcendence." The mystery grew when detectives found a secret cellar under the east wing of the house. Sheriff's reports say that there are 7 small rooms, each directly below one of the 7 windows above. There was evidence of long-term occupation in each chamber, such as a narrow bed, a chamber pot, and few personal items. The chains that were attached to the wall of each chamber and showed signs of regular use were the most disturbing. This finding led to the obvious and horrible conclusion that the 7 daughters were not Whitfield's family at all, but women who were being held against their will. But this theory also had its problems. There had been no reports of 7 women going missing in Missouri or nearby states during the time in question. People had seen the women walking around town from time to time, and they didn't seem to be forced to do anything. And if they were prisoners, what could explain why they seemed to have disappeared before the fire? Sheriff James McCready of Shannon County, who was in charge of the investigation, wrote in his official report about a detail that really bothered him. Each of the underground chambers contained a journal, apparently maintained by its occupant. Most pages had been deliberately removed, leaving only scattered entries that paint a confusing picture. Some entries suggest a voluntary participation in what is referred to as the Great Work or the Alignment. Others contain what appear to be desperate pleas for release. The most troubling thing is that the handwriting in each journal changes a lot over time, starting with educated, elegant script and ending with almost childlike scrawls. This implies either significant mental decline or the possibility that various individuals occupied the same chambers at different intervals. The investigation was made harder by the fact that the area was so remote and that there weren't many forensic tools available in 1869. After 3 weeks, no bodies were found, and there was no clear evidence of foul play other than Whitfield's own death, which some people thought might have been suicide. The case was officially classified as death by misadventure with suspicious circumstances. The property was abandoned, and the house's remains were left to rot in the remote valley. For almost 100 years, the case was a disturbing, but mostly forgotten part of local history. Then, in 1957, while building a forestry service road through the old Whitfield property, workers found a metal box buried about 3 feet below the surface where the eastern wall of the house would have been. Inside was a journal, but the author was unknown. Later, handwriting analysis would show that it had been written by a woman who had gone to school in the 1,850 seconds, or 1,860 seconds. The Missouri Historical Society keeps the journal, which only has 7 entries, all of which are dated September 1st, from 1,863 to 1,869. The handwriting gets worse and worse over the years, but each entry has the same scary message. I sit at my window and watch for the dawn. He says, "When the right day comes, the light will set us free. My sisters sleep in darkness. It is my turn to watch. I alone am trusted with the light today. Tomorrow belongs to another. We take our turns. We keep our silence. We wait for the day of perfect alignment." The last entry, from the 1st of September 1869, just 11 days before the fire, says, "The waiting ends with the harvest moon. 7 windows, 7 sisters, 7 sacrifices made, 7 sacrifices required in return. He believes he will transcend. We know better. The sunrise will bring a different transformation altogether. The key has been turned. We have learned patience in our windowless rooms below. Now we will teach him darkness in return." Dr. Eleanor Apprentice, who looked at the Journal for the Historical Society in 1958, said that the document had some strange things about it. The ink used for each year's entry has small differences in its makeup, which supports the idea that each one was written exactly 1 year apart. The paper itself is more unusual. Each entry is written on a different type of paper, but they are all bound together as if they were all from the same place. The examination of fingerprints preserved in the oils on the pages is the most telling. Initial testing suggests that a minimum of 5 distinct individuals extensively interacted with these pages, corroborating the hypothesis that multiple women contributed to what initially seems to be a singular author's journal. Dr. Harold Mackenzie, who was then a professor of anthropology at the University of Missouri, became interested in the Whitfield case in 1962. He looked at all the evidence, including land surveys of the property, and found something that made the already disturbing story even more disturbing. The 7 windows had been built with strange accuracy. When drawn on a map and linked to different geographical features on the property, like a unique boulder, an unusual tree formation, or a bend in the creek, they made a pattern that looked like the Pleiades constellation, which is also called the Seven Sisters. Mackenzie's research extended beyond geographical alignments. He worked with astronomers from the university to do a thorough analysis of Whitfield's astronomical calculations that were found in the outbuilding. What came out was proof of an obsession with a certain astronomical event. The Pleiades constellation would line up perfectly with the eastern horizon at dawn, and the 7 windows would show it in a certain order as the Earth turned. The astronomers said that this kind of thing would only happen once every 28 years at that exact spot. Mackenzie's discovery about the location of the house itself was more important. He used astronomy to figure out that the sun would have risen perfectly in line with the central window of the 7 on the morning of the 13th of September 1869, the day after the fire. This astronomical event would only happen once every 28 years at that exact spot. There were known to be such cults in the intellectual circles of the mid-1800s, especially among people who were interested in what was then called celestial divination. Mackenzie put forth a troubling idea in his 1963 paper, Astronomical Obsession and Ritual Imprisonment. The Whitfield case. The evidence suggests Whitfield believed he could achieve some form of transcendence or immortality by creating a perfect terrestrial reflection of the Pleiades constellation, using 7 women as vessels for what he perceived as celestial energy. Mackenzie theorized that Whitfield may have belonged to an obscure astronomical cult, possibly connected to certain esoteric European traditions that viewed the Pleiades as having mystical significance. The windows weren't just for show. They were meant to let in certain types of starlight when they were perfectly aligned. The underground rooms were probably used for cleaning or getting ready, and the women were probably kept there between their scheduled times to look out the windows above. The recovered journal suggests that Whitfield had created a complex system of rituals, possibly because he thought that each woman needed to be in tune with a different star in the constellation. Many academics disagreed with Mackenzie's paper because they thought his ideas were just guesses. But later discoveries would support his more troubling conclusions. The names of the 7 women were not known until 1965, when an archivist at the Massachusetts State Library found a link while sorting through the papers of the now-closed Northfield Academy for Young Ladies. In 1861, 7 students and 1 astronomy professor went missing from the academy. It was thought that they had run away together, which caused a small scandal. The names of the 7 young women were not the same as those of the Whitfield daughters, but their physical descriptions were very similar. A group photo of the 7 students standing around their professor, who was named Jeremiah Wickham, not Whitfield, and holding an astronomical instrument, was the most telling. The back said, "The Pleiades Circle, 1861. May our studies of the heavens lift us above our earthly limits." Academy records show that Wickham was fired from his job in early 1861 because people were worried about his strange teachings and his inappropriate closeness to a small group of students. According to reports, his lectures had gone from regular astronomy to talks about stellar consciousness and the divine nature of celestial bodies. In a complaint from January 1861, several faculty members said they were worried that Professor Wickham has abandoned scientific rigor in favor of mystical speculation. claiming the Pleiades cluster contains the secret to transcending human limitations. Several impressionable students have become devoted to these theories, forming what amounts to a cult of personality around him. If Wickham and Whitfield were the same person, it means that what started as a group of astronomers may have turned into something much worse over time. What would make an educated man isolate himself and 7 former students in the remote Ozark wilderness, build a house with such precise celestial alignments, and then imprison the women in underground chambers? The last pieces of evidence found in 1968 might hold the key. The creek that used to run through the Whitfield property dried up completely during an unusually bad drought. This revealed a line of stone markers that were usually hidden by water. The county dug up the area and found the bodies of 7 women buried in a circle around a central point. Forensic analysis, which was limited by the technology of the time, guessed that the remains had been buried for many decades, which fits with the Whitfield timeline. In his report, Dr. N.E.Y. Marcus Hollingsworth, the forensic pathologist who looked at the remains, pointed out several disturbing things. Each skeleton was facing away from the center, with their arms outstretched as if they were begging. Finding out that each skull had a small, perfectly drilled hole in the same spot the middle of the forehead was even more disturbing. It looks like a special tool was used to make these holes before the person died. Each body also had a silver medallion around its neck, with a different star from the Pleiades constellation carved into it. The most important thing was that each grave had a different mineral deposit: iron ore, copper, silver, gold, mercury, tin, and lead. These are the 7 metals that ancient astronomers thought were connected to celestial bodies. The burials were in exactly the right places, following the pattern that Mackenzie had found, which linked the 7 windows to features in the landscape. The sun would rise directly over the central window of the house, which is now gone if you stood in the middle of this circle of graves on the morning of September 13. The most troubling thing of all was what an aerial survey by the Forestry Service found in 1968. When taken from above during the drought, the whole area around the old Whitfield property, including the house foundation, the creek, some rock formations, and the burial sites, looked just like the Pleiades constellation. Some of the features were natural, while others were clearly changed by people. The whole property had been turned into a mirror of the heavenly formation on the ground. This finding led to a closer look at Whitfield's astronomical journals. Cryptographers from the University of Missouri found a code hidden in the seemingly random calculations. It was a set of instructions for what Whitfield called the alignment ritual. The decoded text described a ceremony that was to take place at dawn on September 13, 1869, with 7 women standing at 7 windows, each reciting different astronomical calculations as the light of the rising sun passed through the glass. The purpose of the ritual was to create a conduit between flesh and star, which would let Whitfield rise to the celestial plane through the gateway of sacrifice. The case was officially closed in 1969, exactly 100 years after the events at Whitfield Manor. The official conclusion was that Jeremiah Whitfield, also known as Wickham, had kidnapped the 7 women from the Massachusetts Academy, possibly with their help at first, and set up a remote compound for astronomical observations that seemed to be part of a ritual. Over time, their situations had changed from being academic colleagues to being prisoners. The proof showed that the women had killed Whitfield, set fire to the house, and either run away or, more likely, died on the property, with their bodies hidden by someone else. But there are still questions. If the women died, who buried them in such a precise pattern? If they escaped, why were no traces of them ever found? And what could have caused the precise astronomical alignments that would have taken years to plan and carry out? In her 1972 study of the case, historian Eliza Montgomery, who specializes in obscure movements from the 19th century, put forth a theory. The evidence suggests a tragic evolution from intellectual exploration to psychological manipulation and eventual imprisonment. Wickham probably started out as a charismatic professor with strange ideas that drew in dedicated students. The isolated Ozark setting created the ideal conditions for what modern psychology would call classic cult dynamics, separating people from their families and society, gaining more control over their daily lives, and making extreme behaviors more normal. The obsession with astronomy was both the reason for and the way to control. The apparent sophistication of Whitfield's astronomical knowledge remains unexplained. His calculations for the 28-year alignment cycle were very accurate for the time, which suggests that he had real astronomical skill that he used for bad purposes. A note that was found paperclipped to the Whitfield file in the Shannon County Sheriff's Archives in 1969 is probably the most chilling part of the case. The back of a deputy's calling card had a single note written in faded ink. Visited Old Whitfield Place at dawn, Sept. 13, 1897. Could have sworn I saw 7 women standing in a circle in the mist where the house used to stand. When I approached, they were gone. Exactly 28 years since the fire. Will return in 1925 to see if they appear again. It was Thomas Breedlove, the son of Amos Breedlove, who found Whitfield's body, who wrote this note. County employment records show that Thomas was a deputy from 1892 to 1914 when he quit without giving a reason. His granddaughter gave his personal journal to the Historical Society in 1970. It has more information about his visit to the Whitfield property in 1897. The morning was unusually foggy, and the sun was just starting to rise. As I got closer to the ruins of the eastern wall, I saw what looked like 7 women standing in a circle where the house used to be. They were wearing what looked like white dresses, but the fog made it hard to see details. What was most disturbing was their stance. Each had one arm extended toward the center of the circle, where a shaft of sunlight came through the fog, exactly where the central window would have been. When I called out, the figures seemed to dissolve into the fog itself. I looked around the area carefully but found no footprints or signs of human presence. However, the way the sunlight lined up with the old window location was clear. There is no record of whether this deputy showed up for his appointment with the sunrise in 1925. According to astronomical calculations, the next perfect alignment would have happened in 1953, then again in 1981, and most recently in 2009. Every 28 years, hikers and amateur astronomers go to the site, which is now part of the Mark Twain National Forest. No one has said they saw 7 women in the early morning fog, but many have talked about the creepy feeling of being watched from windows that are no longer there. Robert Kellerman, a graduate student in astronomy at the University of Missouri, camped at the Whitfield site in 1953 to see the alignment. His field notes, which are kept in the university archives, talk about something strange. At exactly 6:17 a.m., as the sun rose over the eastern ridge, the light hit the remains of the central window frame at a perfect angle. For about 42 seconds, the sunlight made a bright path from the window to the center of what would have been the house. During this short time, the local wildlife acted in a strange way. The forest was completely quiet, and then every bird within hearing distance suddenly flew away. The temperature dropped by 7 degrees Fahrenheit during those 42 seconds, but then it went back to normal right away. People who are willing to hike a few miles off the marked trails can still find the foundation stones of the Whitfield house. The eastern wall is the best preserved, with 7 evenly spaced gaps where windows once admitted the rising sun. According to local legend, if you put your head inside one of these empty frames at dawn, you can hear a woman's voice whispering astronomical calculations that count down to a future date when everything will be perfectly aligned. Forest Ranger Wilson Carpenter, who patrolled the area from 1975 to 1998, wrote about a number of strange things that happened there in his official reports. In 1981, during the 28-year alignment cycle, he said, responded to reports of unusual lights at the old Whitfield ruins. Upon arrival before dawn, observed no artificial lights, but noted an unusual atmospheric phenomenon. 7 distinct columns of mist rising from the ground where the eastern wall once stood. As the sun rose, each column appeared to refract the light differently, momentarily creating a rainbow effect. A subsequent investigation revealed no chemical agents or environmental factors that could explain the phenomenon. Since 1978, the site has been officially closed to the public. This is because several hikers reported feeling very disoriented and having memory gaps after visiting the 7 windows. Forest Service records say that these events may have been caused by exposure to limestone dust fungal spores that were disturbed at the ruins. But no clear explanation was ever found. Unofficially, local rangers said they keep a close eye on the area every 28 years, when interest in the site usually grows. Helen Winters, a psychology professor, took a group of students to the site in 1977 as part of a study on the power of suggestion and local folklore. This was before it closed. The study was stopped right away when 3 of the participants had what Winters called acute environmental psychosis in her unfinished research paper. This meant that they suddenly had the same delusions that made them feel like they had to stand at a certain window and wait for the light. All 3 students who were affected got better within 48 hours of leaving the site, but they said they didn't remember what happened during the episode. Winters said that all 3 had been standing right in front of different window openings when the symptoms started. The Missouri Historical Society has a collection of artifacts that were found on the Whitfield property. These include pieces of astronomical instruments, surveyors' tools, and 7 identical silver lockets, each with what looks like a different pressed flower inside. In 1968, the lockets were found buried under each of the 7 windows. This suggests that they were put there on purpose when the house was being built. Each flower is part of a species that opens its blooms at a certain time of day or night, covering a full 24-hour cycle. This makes them a kind of botanical clock. Emmett Richardson, the curator who cataloged these items in 1970, told a strange story about taking pictures of the 7 lockets. Even though they had been preserved for more than 100 years, all 7 flowers crumbled to dust at the same time. It was even more disturbing to find out after the photos were developed that each one had an unexplained light anomaly, a small, star-like light that seemed to hover over each flower. It was not a problem with the equipment because the patterns matched the way the Pleiades constellation is arranged. The journal found in 1957 is still the most mysterious piece of evidence. The paper and ink analysis proves that it is a real 19th century document, but some strange things about it have never been explained. The most important thing is that a note that was not visible before shows up in the margins of the last entry when exposed to ultraviolet light. It looks like it's written in a different hand than the main text. It says, "The next alignment brings the 8th window. We will return when the circle is complete. 2037. In 1980, astronomers used better telescopes to confirm that the Pleiades cluster contains not just 7 major stars, but hundreds, with 8 that stand out. This cryptic message took on new meaning. The 7 sisters of classical astronomy didn't include an 8th star that modern instruments can easily see. Some astronomers thought that this difference might be because one star has gotten a lot dimmer over the last few thousand years. This is something that would have been too small to notice in a human lifetime, but might have been recorded in old astronomical observations. Dr. Rachel Steinman went to the Missouri Historical Society in 1985 to look at the Whitfield materials as part of her research for her book on astronomical cults. Her research notes talk about an unsettling event. While looking over the original journal in controlled lighting, I saw what looked like text fading in and out of view on several pages, with different content than what was normally visible. This phantom text looked like it was written in a mathematical cipher that was similar to, but not the same as the one used in Whitfield's astronomical journals. When I tried to take pictures of these pages, the secondary text didn't show up in the pictures. The phenomenon only happened between 3:17 and 3:24 p.m., which was exactly when sunlight through the archive's window fell directly on the document. Like many historical mysteries from the far-off Ozarks, we may never know the whole truth about the 7-windowed house. Records from that time are missing. Witnesses are long dead, and the land has changed a lot over the past 100 years due to natural growth and erosion. What is left is a disturbing convergence of evidence that something strange happened at the Whitfield property, something involving 7 women, 7 windows, and a man who was obsessed with bringing the heavens and earth into line. In 1992, Dr. Josephine Mercer published a paper that caused a lot of controversy in academic circles. It suggested that there was a direct link between the Whitfield astronomical calculations and some medieval alchemical texts. Mercer says that Whitfield's journals talked about strange manuscripts that dealt with turning stellar energy into physical form. This was basically the idea that celestial bodies could be channeled into human vessels through precise astronomical alignments. This idea, which modern science has rejected, was believed by some esoteric groups in Europe, in the 1800s, especially in German and Austrian astronomical societies, that Whitfield may have written to. Mercer's research found a number of European astronomers who vanished from academic records in the 1850 seconds, possibly because they moved to America to follow theories that mainstream science did not accept. One of these people, Wilhelm Krauss of the Vienna Observatory, wrote a number of papers between 1851 and 1853 that suggested that stellar consciousness could be sent to humans under certain conditions. Krauss quit his job after being made fun of by his coworkers and was never heard from again in history. Mercer found that Krauss's known writings and Whitfield's journals were very similar in both how they were written and how they thought about things. This led Mercer to believe that they might have been the same person. One last thing to note. Astronomers at the Mount Palomar Observatory in California announced in 1957, the same year the buried journal was found, that they had found an eighth star in the Pleiades cluster that had been too faint to see consistently before. Modern astronomy now knows about hundreds of stars in the cluster, but the timing of this discovery in relation to the Whitfield case is still a strange coincidence. In 1994, workers building a forestry road near the old Whitfield property found a sealed glass jar buried about 4 feet below the surface. Inside was a perfectly preserved document that forensic handwriting experts said was written in Jeremiah Whitfield's script. The paper, which was dated the 10th of September, 1869, just 2 days before his death, seemed to be the last instructions for the alignment ritual that was coming up. The most troubling part was the part that talked about what to do if any of the ships resisted. Replacements must be found. The alignment cannot be put off for another 28 years. The stellar gateway opens whether or not people are ready. It's better to have an imperfect transmission than none at all. I have found good alternatives in Eminence and West Plains if I need them. Historians went back and looked at census records from nearby towns in the months after the Whitfield incident because of this finding. It is interesting to note that no women went missing in the area during that time, which suggests that Whitfield's backup plans were never put into action, either because the ships worked together or because things took an unexpected turn on the night of September 12th. Now, most of the Whitfield property is back in the forest. The trees grow through what used to be the house's foundation. The creek has changed its course a little bit over the years of seasonal flooding, but some alignments still exist in the landscape. These are features that don't move and still show the pattern of the seven sisters in the earth and the sky above. Every 28 years, when the sun rises in perfect alignment with where the central window used to be, park rangers say that the forest is unusually quiet, as if the natural world itself is holding its breath and waiting. As part of an environmental impact study, geologist Dr. Sarah Fleming did a full geological survey of the area in 2001. Her report said that the soil at 7 specific points, which used to be where the 7 windows were, had an unusual quality. Soil samples from these 7 places show strange electromagnetic properties that aren't found in nearby areas. Each place has its own electromagnetic signature, but all 7 seem to be part of a harmonically related sequence. What is most interesting is that these electromagnetic anomalies get stronger in the hours around dawn, especially on clear days, which suggests that they interact with solar radiation. There is no clear geological explanation for the phenomenon. The official story about Jeremiah Whitfield and his 7 daughters is that there was a murder and then the possible suspects disappeared. Unofficially, it has become part of the darker folklore of the Ozarks. A reminder that some obsessions can't be explained logically, and that some patterns stay in place long after the people who made them are gone. Martin Crellet, a documentary filmmaker, tried to make a historical investigation of the Whitfield case in 2005. His production notes, which he sent to the Missouri Film Commission, said that many pieces of equipment broke down while they were filming at the site. Cameras would lose power for no apparent reason at certain spots, especially near the remains of the eastern wall. The most disturbing thing was finding that footage shot through the remaining window frames had light anomalies that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. There were 7 different spectra that, when looked at closely, matched the spectroscopic signatures of the 7 main stars in the Pleiades cluster. Crelly quit the project after 3 weeks because the production conditions were not sustainable and the crew was uncomfortable. People still stay away from the area where the house with 7 windows used to be, especially at dawn. What sound engineers called mathematical whispers were recorded on audio. These were faint female voices reading what looked like astronomical calculations. In 1972, an old man from Eminence told a folklore researcher, "Some places hold echoes of what happened there, and some echoes are best left unheard." The Missouri Paranormal Research Society did a study in 2008 that didn't give clear results. Team leader Marcus Davidson said, "We didn't find any normal signs of paranormal activity, but our equipment did pick up strange things that only happened at the 7 window locations. Temperature changes, electromagnetic field changes, and audio anomalies followed a set pattern, moving between the 7 sites every 42 minutes and completing a full cycle every 4 hours and 54 minutes, exactly the time the Pleiades can be seen above the horizon at this latitude. It's still not clear if this is some kind of leftover energy or just strange geophysical properties. The 7 windows of Whitfield Manor are no longer there, but the spaces they used to fill are still there. 7 perfectly aligned holes that frame the rising sun every 28 years, making a celestial calendar that died with Jeremiah Whitfield. Or maybe, as the secret message in the journal says, that purpose is just waiting for its next alignment, its next manifestation, and its next 7 watchers. Dr. Nicholas Chen, an astronomy professor, led a small group of graduate students to record the most recent 28-year alignment in 2009. Their research paper, which came out in the Journal of Archaeoastronomy, proved that Whitfield's calculations were very accurate. At exactly 6 hours 17 minutes and 28 seconds a.m., the sun rose perfectly in line with the central window opening, just as Whitfield's calculations from 1869 said it would. For about 42 seconds, sunlight came through all 7 window openings in a certain order, making it look like there was a focused beam in the middle of the old building. The paper ended by saying, "The mathematical precision needed to calculate this alignment using 19th century methods is extraordinary, which suggests that Whitfield knew more about astronomy than most people of his time." Chen's team also recorded an unexpected event that happened during the 42-second alignment. Our equipment recorded 7 distinct temperature zones within the foundation perimeter, each differing by exactly 1.8 degrees F from adjacent zones. These temperature differentials formed a pattern matching the relative luminosity ratios of the 7 main stars in the Pleiades cluster. This phenomenon has no conventional scientific explanation. Margaret Holloway, a local historian, has kept a collection of stories from hikers, rangers, and locals who have seen strange things happen at the Whitfield site. These include reports of changes in the atmosphere seen through empty window frames, the sound of women's voices saying numbers in unison, and watches or other timepieces not working right nearby, often stopping at 6:17 a.m., no matter when they were checked. Even though these stories don't have scientific proof, the fact that they have been told for decades suggests that there is a long-standing folklore tradition about the place. A 2015 archaeological survey using ground-penetrating radar found more strange things under the old house foundation. Dr. Thomas Reynolds, who led the survey, said, "We found what looks like a second foundation layer about 8 feet below the known cellar level. This deeper structure is older than the Whitfield house by many decades, and may have been an earlier attempt to build a structure at this astronomically important site." What was even more interesting was finding a chamber directly below where the central window used to be, containing what imaging suggests is a stone pillar or column aligned with magnetic north. This feature does not look natural and would have taken a lot of work to position at this depth. On the 13th of September 2037, the next perfect alignment will happen. Maybe the morning fog in the Ozarks will finally reveal the truth about the 7 windows. That day, the case will still be one of the most disturbing and mysterious parts of Missouri's hidden history. Researchers who study the links between astronomy, psychology, and cult dynamics have been looking at the Whitfield case again in recent years. In a 2018 paper, Dr. Eleanor Voss, a psychiatric historian at Washington University, said that the Whitfield case was a perfect storm of astronomical obsession, charismatic manipulation, and isolated environmental conditions, which led to a cycle of control and illusion that kept getting worse. Voss said that what probably started out as an intellectual pursuit slowly turned into something more evil as Whitfield's mental health got worse. Her analysis of his writings indicated a progressive belief that he was receiving direct celestial communication through astronomical observations, eventually convincing himself that the Pleiades cluster was attempting to establish a terrestrial presence through human vessels. This delusion, reinforced by the isolation of the Ozarks setting and his complete control over his female students, created conditions for what modern psychiatry would classify as a shared psychotic disorder. The Women's Journal suggests an initial willingness to participate in astronomical research, Voss wrote, followed by increasing doubt and resistance as Whitfield's demands became more extreme. The underground chambers likely represented a transition from voluntary participation to forced confinement as the women attempted to resist or escape. What is still not clear, though, is how Whitfield was able to make such precise astronomical calculations, how the Pleiades constellation was mirrored so well on Earth, and, of course, what happened to the 7 women. There is no record of what happened to them after they killed Whitfield and got away. If they died on the property, who put their bodies in the creek bed in such a precise way? And what causes the same things to happen every 28 years? There is an interesting note in Shannon County's historical records. 7 women who looked like the daughters of the Whitfields signed up for classes at 7 different women's colleges in the United States, from Massachusetts to California, in the months after the Whitfield incident. Each used a different last name to register, but they all said they had private study in astronomical sciences as their previous education. By 1875, all 7 had earned degrees in mathematics, astronomy, or related fields. By 1880, none of them were listed in public records anymore. Dr. Marcus Davidson, a paranormal researcher who looked into the site in 2008, gave what might be the most poetic but unscientific review. Some places become thin points between worlds, not because of supernatural forces, but because of the sheer intensity of human obsession focused on a single purpose over time. Whatever Whitfield thought he was doing with his 7 windows and 7 women, he made something that still echoes through that landscape. The windows framed not only the rising sun, but also a particular kind of human madness. The idea that with enough precision, the heavens could be brought to earth. The Whitfield property is still public land, even though it isn't marked on official forest maps. People who make it to the 7 window openings often say they feel like they are being watched and called at the same time. The frames are now just holes in a crumbling stone wall, but they still line up perfectly with the rising sun and the Pleiades constellation every 28 years. Interest in the site will surely grow as the 13th of September, 2037, gets closer. People who are interested in astronomy, history, or just want to know more will go to those 7 empty frames in the Missouri wilderness. They will stand where 7 women once stood, looking out at the dawn through windows made by a man who was obsessed with the stars. And maybe, when the sun is just right in the middle of the opening, they will see what Whitfield wanted so badly to capture. The moment when heaven and earth seem to touch for a brief moment. The 7 windows are still not physical things. They are just absences. Frames around empty space that show what is missing instead of what is there. In that way, they are the perfect monument to the Whitfield mystery itself, a story that is more about what we don't know than what we do. The forest keeps growing around the ruins. The creek still flows past the circle of buried stones. And in the Pleiades cluster, 400 light-years from Earth, 7 stars shine, unaware of the obsession they once caused in a remote Ozark valley. This obsession turned astronomical observation into something much darker, a pursuit that left 7 windows facing east, waiting for the perfect dawn.